Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Marketing Jedi, a podcast series by InMobi in association with Microsoft. I am Ankit Grover and I lead InMobi's digital native business for the Indian market. We have a very exciting conversation lineup for you today. I'm excited to welcome our guest Ishan Bose, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of KreditBee, India's largest fintech platform for personal loans for professionals, which has helped formalizing the credit delivery in India. He has a decade of experience where he has handled field sales, inside sales, B2B sales, business development, collections, customer support, L&D, PR, and events at various stages of at KreditBee. He has a previous experience in social media consulting, which includes social analytics, social intranet gamification, social media management, and product management. He is also a TEDx speaker and has been invited as a keynote speaker, guest lecturer, panelist, and judge by many renowned forums and colleges in India, and is a very good friend of mine. Welcome to the Marketing Jedi podcast again, Ishan. Good to have you here.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much, Ankit, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm very, very glad and excited to be a part of this podcast. And I really look forward to add some good insights, which and have a discussion with you, which would probably help both of us as well as all the viewers to gain some valuable inputs at the end of the session.
Thanks, Ishan. I'm hoping that you are keeping well. Everybody at KreditBee's are keeping well, and everybody is jabbed. That's most important in this phase. Yeah. So then maybe let's get started, right? For all the viewers, to kick off the conversation, we would love to know about your journey in consumer marketing and advertising industry. How has the industry evolved overall, especially from technology standpoint?
Sure. So if you ask about my own journey in marketing advertising, Ankit, it started probably during my MBA. So I did my PGDM from IIM Indore. So when I entered college in 2012, interestingly, I happened to be a finance enthusiast because I had 1 year of experience in a bank. Of course, not in a finance role, but more of a technical role post engineering. But my entire focus back then was to get into finance. However, as destiny had it, there was this double dip recession. I mean, which I think very well resonates with something like a second wave of lockdown that we just went through. So just like that, there was the first recession, and then there was a double dip recession where that hit around 2011, 2012, and that is exactly when I entered college. So the entire finance internships had dried out. So by luck or by chance, I got an internship in sales and marketing back then. And that's when I thought that, okay, now that I have entered this domain, or at least I'll be doing my internship in this domain, why not explore this a little bit further and see what exactly this domain has for me. And that's when I started taking up multiple marketing projects. I also won a few competitions at college and at national level in the marketing domain. And that was my first stint, if I had to say, with the domain of marketing in a slightly serious manner. When it comes to the full-time experience, so around 5 to 6 years back, while I was doing my first job post MBA, my manager, who currently happens to be a very good friend of mine and the founder of the company, which is Madhu, we were working at Huawei together, and we decided that we should do something on our own. And that's when we thought, that we can probably do something in the fintech lending space. And since marketing is something I had started to enjoy a lot by then, so I took up the role of the marketing and sales head. Specifically at KreditBee, which was our first platform in the current company. Again, it's a KreditBee with a K. So it was rather a platform where we were providing loans to college students to basically support their curricular and co-curricular activities. And I was leading the entire sales management over there for almost 2 years. Marketing definitely was a part of my role, but then we were not really doing a lot of digital advertising. So the focus was to acquire consumers offline and then probably move them through the funnel digitally. So that was the focus over there, which is not exactly digital marketing, but more of sales driven marketing. Then in 2018, we launched our second platform by the name of KreditBee, again, which starts with a K. And this is typically a platform which provides, as you very rightly mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this is something that provides loans to young professionals digitally end to end, right from origination to disbursement to even repayment of the loan. Everything is 100% digital. So since the entire focus is digital, so my role shifted completely towards the digital scheme of things, where the idea was to acquire and convert people, which 100% digitally. So
Mhm.
that's how my own journey has been in marketing, as from an internship and a few competitions to leading sales to even kind of now leading the marketing and sales completely end to end. You asked about how the advertising industry overall has evolved over the last few years. So
Mhm.
one thing definitely is that there is more emphasis on internet now. So definitely internet as a phenomenon has become much more popular, much more commonplace in the last decade or so. I remember when I was at college, engineering college in from 2007 to 2011.
Mhm.
I had a phone with a Symbian smartphone, if you could call it a smartphone by current standards, and it was Nokia N72, if I remember correctly. So it was a
Mhm.
very basic phone, and even if I was able to connect to Google on that phone, it used to feel like it used to feel like we are doing something very very advanced, right? But now, I mean, you talk about the current scheme of things. You can practically do everything, or you can avail any service or any utility on the internet on your phone, right? So definitely, with this advent of internet and with mobile apps, there has been a tectonic shift of the user behavior also, where people are now relying more online or mobile specific services to avail things that they want to. Specifically on the advertising side, this has led to a large boom in performance marketing. So I don't think 10 to 15 years back, performance marketing was that big a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of the marketing that used to happen was, or most of the advertising that used to happen was primarily to enhance the brand awareness or brand recalls. It was more of brand building or branding extension rather than something which was driving sales outright. Whereas with the advent of internet, with more contextual user PIIs, with larger personalization of ads because of more data that we have about the users, the entire shift has happened largely towards performance marketing. And at least for us, and I know it for a fact that it's the case with most of the advertisers, majority of the digital marketing spend today now goes towards performance marketing than towards brand marketing. So that's another shift that has happened, where people are actually selling stuff online rather than just creating awareness. And finally, I believe there has also been an advent of product marketing very recently over the last 5 to 7 years. Earlier, a lot of it was taken up during the days of FMCG marketing, which was more offline oriented. There was a lot of this was taken up by market research. Of course, market research starts even before the conceptualization, and then it goes on and on. But right now, a lot of it has transformed or translated into product marketing, which is a function that's an intersection of product and marketing both. And the idea is to do introspection as well as look outside. So while when you're doing your performance marketing or brand marketing, of course it all starts inside out, but the idea is to acquire users from outside and bring them to their platform. But what product marketing does is it gives you a lot of scope to identify best ways to translate those users into actual transacting users, and what is the best possible way to make them to cross sell stuff on the platform, or to make them transact more frequently on the platform. So this again requires a lot of introspection as much as market research. So which is where I think product marketing in itself has become a big deal over the last 5 to 7 years, when you look at marketing and advertising overall. So I believe these are a few things that have definitely changed the overall scope of marketing and advertising.
So just coming back on that, thanks, Ishan. Right, I think what you said is rightly right. The movement from brand to performance marketing, especially in the digital native ecosystem, right? Given that you yourself is one of the largest digital native innovation that has happened in the last decade, right? Is the movement from brand to perf. And second is the product marketing, right? Especially for one is getting the new users on board. The most important thing is letting the users know what the product is all about, right? And also trying to get LTV and CPAC around it, right? So, and thanks for that, Ishan. Just a follow-up question. I think viewers would love to understand the evolution of fintech as a vertical in India, especially on a digital native as a vertical, right? And your inspiration to join fintech slash KreditBee, right? So, I mean, will all the viewers would love to understand from you.
Awesome. So that's a fairly interesting question, Ankit. So let me just take it in two parts. First one being the evolution of fintech over the last decade or so. So I was speaking in the previous part of the conversation that when I was in college, when I graduated from college in 2011, so even then I was using a Symbian smartphone where even connecting to the internet and doing a basic Google search seemed very, very advanced. However, in the last 10 years, if we just look at how fintech as an industry has transformed, starting from making payments at any of the vendor outlets, online or offline, if you just scan a QR code or if you just enter the details of the vendor to whom you want to make the payment, and the money gets transferred instantly from your wallet to the other to the other vendors or the other individuals' wallet for that matter. From that to even doing P2P transactions via Google Pay or any of the other UPI platforms where I can just transfer money to you without even adding you as a payee on my bank account or in my net banking, right? So by just knowing your contact number, or again on the vendor side, on the merchant side rather, just by scanning a QR code, you can make the payment outright. There are wealth management apps that have come up where basis your spends that you do across via cash as well as on your different apps. These apps are able to identify what's the best way in which you can manage your
Yeah.
expense. So it's expense management, and then of course the wealth management comes in where a lot of advisory, lot of robo advisory for that matter. All these things have come in where you can get expert advice online on your smartphone, and which is very, very customized to what you stand for and how your financials look. To even availing a loan online. I mean, that's something the lesser said, because we ourselves are into that industry, and definitely we there are quite a few other players which form a part of the fintech lending ecosystem. So nobody could imagine that something like a loan, which seems, even if you go today to a tier 2 or a tier 3 town and ask anyone above the age of 40 or 45 about what exactly it takes to get a loan from a bank, they can tell you that how much of a painful and how much of a sorry to use the word, but bureaucratic that process is, where there is so much paperwork involved. There is no TAT as such. It could take even up to weeks to get a loan. There's no guarantee that so even to have that decision whether your loan is approved or not, that in itself takes a lot of time, and you can't even apply at multiple places because you have to actually go to different bank branches and apply for a loan.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things used to make, and I was just talking about a few use cases, starting from online payments to digital payments to even robo advisory, wealth management, fintech lending. So if you talk about the problem statements that led to these solutions, they were very, very stark. They were very, very I would say critical for us to move forward as an economy and as a nation overall. And I definitely feel that with more internet, with more of people using mobile apps, this has definitely led to larger awareness among users that things can be done digitally. Of course, it took off slowly because financials, wherever they are involved, people are definitely a little more risk averse in India. But over a period of time, they have understood that there are lesser frauds, close to negligible frauds. All these platforms, all these propositions are as credible as they get. And with the mass widespread adoption, I sincerely believe that fintech as a sector has grown rapidly and massively over the last few years. So that's why I feel it's the boom of the decade. If you talk about from 2010 to 2020, if you ask me why I chose to join fintech, so being very upfront and honest with you, I did not know much about fintech when I started or when we started this company.
Mhm.
I mean, because back then fintech was not as huge, so we definitely had a Paytm and a couple of other companies which were
Yeah.
doing things in fintech different to lending. But then again, fintech as a sector was very very nascent back then,
Mhm.
and we truly didn't know what is the power of fintech. To really understand that, we had to study about what fintech has done in US or Western Europe or even China for that matter. Read up a little bit on read up a little bit on the neobanks and how those things have evolved. So all those case studies outside India gave us confidence that we can do something similar in India and actually provide loans to people when they need it, but even without going out of their homes, just at the just at the disposal of their smartphones.
Mhm.
They can avail loans anytime, anywhere, anyhow. So that concept in itself was very, very exciting for us.
Mhm.
And we started identifying ways of doing it. And of course, we are still in the process of optimizing it. But I would say we have come a long way since when we started. And the fact that we have disbursed we disperse over 1 million loans in a quarter.
Mhm.
Talking about pre-COVID numbers, rather over 1 million new loans in a quarter. And if you talk about the overall loan count, that has gone up to over 1 million a month. Again, talking about the pre-COVID numbers. So talking about these numbers, thinking through it, really feels that we have come a certain way, and definitely there's a long way to go. So that's
Yeah,
how.
absolutely, completely agree with you, Inshan, right? And especially, I'm a huge fan of the way that you guys have formalized credit delivery in India, right? And especially at scale, right? That is a phenomenal for many of the digital native brands in India and also in the other markets in APAC as well, right? The way that you have formalized the entire credit delivery in India, which has been one of the biggest pain point and managing at scale, right, has been in really inspiring stories for most of the brands and the users as well, right? Thanks for that, Ishan, right? Maybe just wanted to get some sense on the ad tech as an ecosystem, right? So could you please dwell on the core reason why you think ad tech is indispensable in the digital world today?
Sure. So let me answer this in a slightly more fundamental manner. So let's just talk about any entity and the consumer base that it caters to. I'm not even talking about credit. It could be any entity that is reaching out to their respective consumer base. So today, as an advertiser, your consumer base majorly is spending their time on the internet,
Mm.
and that too on the mobile phone. So whether it's on mobile, they could be simply chatting on WhatsApp, or they could be scrolling through Instagram, or they could be watching YouTube videos, or they could just be on any of the leisure apps. But for anything and everything, the average smartphone usage of millennials is anywhere between 4 to 6 hours a day,
Mm.
and that's a lot of time, because these are the people who spend the most, who engage the most with all the propositions that are coming out, right? So now, as an advertiser or a brand, when I reach out to the consumers, I actually want to understand that where they are and what they're doing. Now, with the understanding that they are spending so much time on the mobile phones, on the respective apps, gives me a lot of confidence that here's an inventory which I
Mm.
can exploit to my benefit to get the maximum ROI from the consumers who belong to me, or who should belong to me, basis the proposition that I am going out with. Right. Now, the problem of having such a huge set of people, or let me call it a challenge rather than a problem, but the challenge right now of having so many people on the smartphones, on their respective smartphones, doing their stuff, is that it's a huge base, and not every one of them is my consumer. And not just for KreditBee, but for any proposition. I don't think there is a single proposition that you would say that, okay, everyone and anyone is my consumer. So every entity has a TG. Of course,
Yeah.
there are certain entities which have a wider TG. There are certain entities that have a very niche TG. TG as in target group for the audience benefit. So now, for any advertiser to make sense out of their advertising dollars, the idea is to tap this huge inventory of online consumers to the best of their benefit. And that is only possible when you understand, first of all, who you are and what you stand for. And with that understanding, you have to connect it to who is the right target group or audience to whom you want to reach. It's again a very fundamental exercise that every marketer, every product, every company does before they even develop the product. That's part of your market research or your product market fit. And then of course, once you go out with the proposition, you evolve it, you make it more refined for your TG, and sometimes you even pivot it. But in that process, the identification of your TG is very, very important. And that's the reason I feel, ad tech is indispensable. Because when you talk about the way advertising was done 10, 15 years back through the ATL modes, whether it's newspapers, advertisements on television, radio, and all that, it did not give you an option of filtering out consumers who are not meant for you versus the ones who are meant for you. Because if there's you're running a TV ad or a newspaper, you're practically reaching out to everyone, who's reading that newspaper or watching the television ad. But if you're doing contextualized advertising via ad tech, I can actually reach out to the smartphone of Ankit. And at the same time, I won't be reaching out to the smartphone of, let's say, Ankit's brother or Ankit's wife, because I know my TG is Ankit and not probably anyone else in his family. So that's the level of personalization, and that definitely gives a very good ROI impact and a very good purchase experience to the consumer also, because a consumer doesn't have to deal with irrelevant ads. So I believe it's a win-win both at the advertiser end and the consumer end, and that's why I feel ad tech is indispensable in today's digital world.
Thanks, Ishan. I really love the way that you have put the consumer as the center, right? So, and one is, of course, as you said, ad tech helps you in scale, reaching out the right set of users, especially in a market like India where mobile is booming. And I think with FG, it's gonna get double of what we see in next few years, right? At the same time, right, with the targeting cuts and contextual, making sure the user gets to see a right content or right ad, right, and for advertiser also, or for brand also, it becomes much more easier, because you are not wasting a lot of money on the users who are not relevant for your product, right? And that comes to your product marketing fit also, right? Reaching on the right set of users, landing them on your app application, influencing them, and driving LTV from them. Thanks for that, Ishan. uh, Especially a lot has happened in the last 1 year, right? If I take this year also as an extension of what we saw in 2020 with an onset of pandemic, there has been a lot of restructuring that has happened in the space. Now things have completely gone digital. There has been a lot of challenges that companies have faced to get there. Can you share some of the insights from your experience the past 1.5 years, right? How did you manage to do that, especially given that your business or surrounds around digital native, right? So we are more like a neo banking or neo fintech world in terms of micro loan lending ecosystem, right? So what's structurally changed that you saw in the last 1.5 years?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question, Ankit. And honestly speaking, what you said is very, very true. So with the onset of, no one saw the pandemic coming. I think
Yeah.
that was very, very unprecedented, and a lot of companies, including us, had to think when the pandemic actually hit us, because it didn't give us a lot of time to even prepare about how to do operation, and specifically for a fintech lending platform like us. So while the entire process is digital, there are certain operational processes like tele collections that we rely on to keep our NPAs and the overall book quality in check. Now, when COVID hit us, it was a very, very critical time for us to think that what is the best way in which we can embrace this situation and make the most out of it. Some companies like Make My Trip and all, they even pivoted their business models a little bit. Even the cab companies started focusing a lot more on food delivery. So there were these kind of pivots that kind of that became more and more popular, and that boomed more and more when you look at the industry overall. However, being a very conservative fintech lending platform, we did not want to really change our industry of operations, or even within the industry, we didn't want to do something which was way out of the box. So we thought instead, let's stick to our strength, and at the same time, let's use the situation to the benefit of us and our consumers. So what we did, one is we started, or we took this opportunity to educate our consumers more and more. Educate about what? Educate about the importance of credit score, the importance of timely repayments, because we did not, so because there was a moratorium that that was imposed by the RBI for two periods of 3 months each, starting from 1st of March to 31st of May, and then from 1st of June to 31st of
Yeah.
August. For those of the viewers who probably might not understand moratorium, it typically means that any loan or any EMI that is pending during this period, even if it is not repaid on time, let's say an EMI is falling on 5th of March, which is in this moratorium period. So if the EMI is not paid on 5th of March, as a lender, we cannot impose any kind of penalty or late payment fees to the user, which typically means that even if the user pays the money 6 months later or after the moratorium period, they will just have to pay the the overall amount that they had to, without any penalty. So that was the situation. Now, the challenge with this was there was a lot of uneducation and financial illiteracy there is, rather, I'm not even talking about it in past tense, but even currently there is a lot of financial illiteracy and uneducation in India, which is why a lot of people looked up to this moratorium as a loan holiday. So they thought that what moratorium typically means is that you don't have to repay the loans, and you're done. Basically, because of the COVID situation, you don't have to come and repay, which is not the case. Secondly, some people who understood that they could pay it late probably did not understand that while the penalty or the late payment fees is foregone, the interest amount will keep compounding on the principal that is outstanding, which means that even though I don't have to pay any late payment fees, if I pay the money 6 months later, I'll actually have to incur 6 months of additional interest over and above the principal that is outstanding. So now these things were very, very critical, not just for us to understand, but also to ensure that our consumers understand this so that they don't take any decisions that are rash and uninformed. So we used multiple marketing channels and sales channels also, primarily telesales, to educate our consumers, our existing as well as new consumers, whatever little we were disbursing, a lot about these kind of things that hey, this is what moratorium entails, and this is exactly what will happen in case you don't repay your EMIs on time, and then the choice is yours. So that was one thing: education of consumers, making them more financially aware and educated. Second is product innovation. So we came up with multiple customized repayment options. So earlier our repayment options were very, very standard and binary, that this is the EMI date and you have to repay the complete amount in full, and so on and so forth. But we had to understand our consumer cohorts a little bit further in detail, and for different cohorts we identified different repayment methodologies that work the best for them. So that led to a lot of, or rather, that was driven by a lot of product and strategy innovation, where the idea was to ensure that it's not black and white. It's not that either you repay completely on time the entire amount, or you don't do it. We had to identify middle ways, and that's what helped us keep our books in check when probably the entire industry's books went bad. So that was the other thing. The third and final thing, which is more of empathy, was to be sensitive to the situation. At the end of the day, businesses will have its ups and downs. Situations will come, situations will go. But we understand that your consumers make who you are. So the idea was to be very, very sensitive, very, very understanding of the consumers, and not forcing anyone, not harassing anyone, because a lot of companies did that in the market. But we ensured that come what may, we will be sympathetic and sensitive towards our consumers, and the idea to help them is something that we follow with us. So these were a few things I believe we did over the last 1.5 year on product innovation, on customer education, and finally on being empathetic towards the user. So that's what I believe we did differently.
No, thanks, Ishan. I love the idea, the way that you made sure that you still engage with the user. I know there was a time that it was, I think, for the fintechs, especially in the micro lending, that was the worst ever hit in some form, right? It was pandemic, which was unprecedented. At the same time, moratorium, where the users were not aware about the plus and minuses, right? So the way that you reached out to them, right, with all the marketing channels as well as the sales channels, and keep them informed and make them engaged also, right? So when the things are okay and back, right, and they can come back and start using the application or platform once again, right? So thanks for that, Ishan. Just a follow-up question on that, right? So this is an interesting one, right? And wanted to get some view on this. But how has the advent of apps transformed from brand audience relationship? And you briefly touched upon what you did, how you did during the peak of the unprecedented time, right, where India was is not in a great shape, right? Wanted to get your sense, right? How are you interacting with your audiences, especially in the funnel, the entire funnel, which is awareness slash acquisition slash engagement and more.
Sure. So when you talk about the brand audience relationship with respect to, let's say, awareness or acquisition or even engagement for that matter, I think specifically for fintech, it's a matter of marrying the data from multiple sources into a common view. So what I mean by that typically, so let's just take an example. So when we acquire a consumer online via any of the digital channels, we have a few basic details of the user, like the device from which the app was installed, and certain device parameters that come with it. Which channel the user came from, how many ads the user saw before, basic from the attribution platforms or the MMPs. Of course, we get to know that how many different ads the user saw before the person actually clicked on the ad and came to the platform. We can even do an ad level analysis, that what kind of keywords or what kind of use cases in the ad copies actually triggered the user to, actually install the app. So that is pre-install information about the user, and the device coordinates that come with it. Then once the user comes to the platform, they enter certain details about themselves, like their basic PIIs, their let's say their PAN, from which we can also get the credit score with the user's permission. Then they do their KYC. So then there's the data that the user voluntarily enters about himself or herself on the platform. Then there is a lot of interaction, CRM interaction that happens with the user. So let's say the user receives certain SMSs, push notifications, emails, even the calls that the user gets, for, let's say, informing them about certain offerings and offers that we have. So all these data, and then of course how many transactions the user makes, how the user engages on the app, how many sessions the user has, which all products the user scrolls and stuff like that. So when you bring all this data together in a singular view, right? Because right now the source of all these data points is different. Some of it is coming from the MMP, some of it is coming from the user directly, some of it we are able to derive from the information that the user has given. Like let's say user has given us a PAN, and we are pulling the credit score of the user from that PAN ID. Then a CRM level transaction, the CRM level information, the transactions the user does. So the sources of all these data is very, very different. So now when you put it all together in a singular view, it's a very strong consumer persona that you're sitting on. And the idea for any marketer right now is to bring all of it together and reach out to the consumer in a way that is as personalized as it gets. And this is something that is not possible without the ad tech or the digital marketing that we are talking about. Because you walk into any retail store offline, even if you have purchased from the same store 20 times, versus let's say I'm a new user who's walking into the store for the first time, until and unless there's a shopkeeper who's able to identify you, it's not possible probably for you to get any better experience or any different experience than what I get, right? So it's very person dependent. Whereas over here, if you bring the data from different sources, put it all together, create a consumer persona, and then structure your marketing, communication, and strategy basis the persona of the user that you have created. The chances of conversion is a lot high, and this is something I can speak from my first-hand experience.
No, I love the idea. I think we were debating this in some time back as well, right? So the importance of data, right? Especially as you said, the way that ad tech can do things in as compared to the offline world is to get true view of the user, right? So what user has been doing and creating a history around it, and giving a one unified view, right? So that is something that I love the way that you guys are doing, right? There's a follow-up question on that, right? Since we are talking about data and some insights around it, right? So please share some more examples about the role of data-driven insights, analytics in the marketing for KreditBee, right? How are you changing the game, as well as how KreditBee has leveraged ad tech for growth and is pretty much riding ahead as compared to your competitors, right? So especially as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of martech and ad tech already happening, right? It's a combination of your ad tech channels, which is your display, programmatic, and all the kind of things. And martech is where the combination of your own channel, which is push notification, SMS, how the omni channel comes into play, and some of the data driven insights and analytics that you use at your end, right, that keeps you ahead of the curve.
Right. So when you talk about data-driven insights, so let me take an example since you talked about examples. So one of the key parameters for us to target users or to identify which users are relevant for us is the credit score. I mean, for those of the audience folks who are not very well aware of credit score, so typically depending on the repayment behavior of any loans that you have taken from an RBI registered bank or NBFC. So whenever you take a loan and you repay the loan, assuming you do, of course. So basis the repayment behavior, your credit score gets impacted. There are four bureaus right now. CIBIL from TransUnion is the most popular one that most of the lending entities use to benchmark the credit score of users. So that credit score is a very key parameter for any lending platform to basically, first of all, choose or to identify the credit worthiness of the user. And second is to identify the credit limit of the user. So maybe I'm giving loans to five people, but I'm not going to be giving the loan of same amount to five people because every person or every individual's profile is different. The way in which we differentiate ourselves, of course, is that we don't just rely on the credit score. We look at a lot of digital coordinates and a lot of device parameters and other stuff, which helps us identify things beyond what a credit score can identify. But then credit score still is a very important parameter for us to target. Now, the challenge for us is that other than the aggregator networks like your Pasa Bazaars and India Lens of the world, if I talk about any digital channel like Google, Facebook, InMobi for that matter, so we don't have any way to directly target using the CIBIL of the consumer because it's not an open data. So my CIBIL is not out there in the open. It is linked to my plan, and there needs to be an explicit query with the consent of the consumer, post which my CIBIL can be identified by any entity that wants to provide me a loan, or where probably I have applied for a loan. Now, how to bridge this gap? So the idea is to look at pseudo indicators. So let's say, very hypothetically speaking, people. So let's say we have the data of the two-wheelers that are owned by the people, or let's say we have the data of the amount of money that people spend online on certain on certain expenses, right? So let's say the pseudo indicator that we identify is that people who own a two-wheeler in the cost or in the price range of 40 to 50,000 rupees, and people who spend online every month in the range of 35 to 40,000 rupees. Again, talking very hypothetically, let's say we identify that people who belong to this cohort are 10 times more likely to have a CIBIL of above 750 than people who are outside this cohort. Now, we don't have the credit score information about the user, but we have been able to, basis the auxiliary information points that we have about the user from channels like InMobi, Facebook, Google, we are able to identify cohorts that could possibly be more credit worthy than the ones who are not. So that is one example that comes to my mind when you talk about data-driven insights. Some other smaller examples, let's say when you talk about acquisition and re-engagement. So let's say we are running an ad in the region of Punjab, Himachal, Haryana, versus we are running another ad that is in Tamil Nadu. Now the face of the person whom we are putting out in these two ads, ideally it should be different. So when I'm putting an ad in the North Indian demography, the idea is to put a face that is slightly more North Indian versus when I'm putting a face in the same ad in south of India. If I'm targeting to a female user and it's a proposition that relates to them directly, it will have more relatability if the ad copy is a female user versus a male user. Same for the other way around. Things like the placement of logo, things like the background color or what kind of background to use. In case of videos, whether to go for animated videos, whether to go for live action videos, whether to go for the transitional gifs. So the idea is that all these what data driven marketing does is it gives you scope of more and more experimentation, and the more you experiment, the more you will be able to optimize your ROAS.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point, Ishan. The way that you're using data for almost everything, right? Right from doing an proxy way of niche targeting so that you reach out the right set of users without wasting a lot of monies, right? And the second thing, how you're bringing the data-driven approach on your creatives, right? Showing the right creative in a DCO way to the right users depending on multiple factors, right? So demog or the persona cuts and all those kind of things, and also the data that you said in some of the other examples or the other earlier questions of using data of once the user has landed on your application, right? When the user has either installed and logged in, and how do you use data for engaging and making sure the user is the right user and drives LTV. And thanks for that, Ishan. Uh, Maybe I'll have a couple of more questions, right? Because this is one of the things I really wanted to. I was too eager to understand, right? Especially how can marketers strike a balance while driving innovation in financial sector?
Sure. So Ankit, when you talk about the financial sector, or let's say we talk about fintech in particular, it's a very conservative business. When you talk about banks, NBFCs, any company that is, or any entity that is completely into financial services, in any geography, not just in India, because of the regulations, the compliances, the capital at play, right? So all these things lead to the business, the way the businesses are done across different geographies. It's very, very conservative. It's very, very there's a very careful approach that people take while running these kind of businesses, because there's real money involved, real time transactions. Small errors, small bugs here and there could lead to major issues. Now with all this, the role of communication becomes very, very key. And the biggest challenge is to keep the communication creative at on one hand, because you cannot be drab and boring when you're reaching out to the consumers, because then you'll become a part of the clutter. So that's one challenge, that you have to be creative, you have to be enticing, you have to be out of the box, and at the same time you have to work within boundary conditions that are very, very strict. So that's the conundrum or paradox in which marketing or marketers in the financial sector have to operate in. The other challenge in financial sector, and specifically let me talk about lending because that's the sector I belong to, is that there are a lot of drop-off points and a lot of rejection points from the time the user signs up till the time the person actually makes a transaction, which in our case is taking a loan. So compared with an e-commerce, right? So in e-commerce, I don't think there is any rejection parameter of a user, right? So anybody who signs up, as long as they enter the details of whatever things they want to, whatever details they have about themselves, they can purchase anything. You just have to make a payment, and you get whatever you want. So it's more about user intent. It's a more generic use case. When you talk about lending, even after the user has signed up, even when as a marketer or as an advertiser, I have got the user to my platform, from there, from that point for till the user gets a loan, the journey is very, very long. Even though in our case it's only 10 minutes, but within those 10 minutes the user has to check their eligibility. They need to be signed off as eligible by our system. Then the user has to do their KYC, which is again very seamless on our platform, but it's still a process. And then after that, the user actually gets a confirmation that the profile has been approved. And then the user has to provide their bank details. They have to do an e-sign, and then they have to take a. So the process is very elaborate, and there are a lot of drop-off and rejection points, which makes the challenge probably 2x, because it's not just getting the user to the platform like probably many of the other platforms, but in fintech, because of the compliances, because of the regulations, because of the risks, You cannot serve anybody and everybody who comes to your platform. So there has to be a lot of filtering that needs to be done, which means the idea is to get the right kind of consumers. And
Yeah.
once you get them, then to push them forward. So that's the challenge. Now, how to strike a balance when it comes to the innovation is to focus on execution particularly.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of thinking of ideas that are bizarre or that are very that sound very exciting when you speak of them in conferences like this, the idea is to look for execution metrics and try to innovate in execution. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, what could be the motivation for a person to come onto your platform and complete the process? Because when you talk about loan as a product, so people don't require loans all the time. So none of us is in a need of loan all the time. So if the entire communication, I'm just giving an example, if the entire communication is get a loan now, get a loan now, maybe it might not work. A better way to communicate probably could be to get your profile approved or get a credit line approved. Because if I have a profile or if I have my credit line approved, even if I require a loan 6 months later, I can just get it on the click of the button. But if the advertiser keeps talking to me all the time as a consumer that, hey, get a loan now at so and so interest, at this and this tenure and stuff like that, it will be too monotonous, linear, and at the same time irrelevant for me because I don't need a loan now. So things like this. So it's a very basic execution tweak where you don't exactly put the CTA as get a loan, but get your profile up. So small
Yeah.
things like this. Then what are the ways of reaching consumers, whether it's your captive base or new users? There are
Yep.
multiple channels. The idea is to identify different channels and reach out to more and more consumers. So long story short, the idea is to do innovation in execution in financial sector, and I think that's where I think there's a better chance of striking the balance
Yeah.
because on ideation things can get out of hand.
Hey, thank Nishan for that. Right. Maybe one last question, and I'm not going to leave you without getting an answer to that. Right. So one or two predictions that you really want, that you really predict, or maybe I should say that you really want for your category, right, which is fintech slash micro lending, right, from the ecosystem. What are your predictions that you really want?
Predictions as an industry or on the digital side?
Digital side.
Okay. So if you ask me, Ankit, and I in fact even mentioned it in one of the articles that I authored a couple of months back. So one thing that will definitely help us is blockchain. So I know blockchain is very regulated on the currencies and otherwise, but as a concept, I believe it has a huge role to play, not just in fintech, but specifically since we are talking about fintech and that to digital marketing in that, I believe it will play a key role. How? So a few challenges that users face today, or rather advertisers face today. One is that there are so many middle entities or intermediaries like your Google, and it might not sound great, like let's say InMobi for that matter. So when we have to reach out to the end consumers, we have to go through these the intermediaries, which of course adds a lot of value today, no doubt about it. But I believe that if there is a way in which, as an advertiser, I can reach out to the user directly without any of the intermediaries, it will save a lot of cost for us, and then probably entities like InMobi can actually focus on bigger things rather than just acting as a conduit between the user and the advertiser. So there's a lesser scope of fraud, a higher ROI. So that's one benefit.
Sure.
Second is there's a lot of ad overserving that happens nowadays because there is no unified profile of the user. So I could be reaching out to Ankit via a Google ad and a Facebook ad and an InMobi ad. Because all these channels don't know that I'm reaching out to Ankit via other parameters also or other channels also. Whereas what we talked about some time back, that if there is a unified profile of Ankit, then I can actually choose that, okay, for Ankit, I'll probably reach out to him via Google,
Mm-hmm.
even though I have 10 other channels at my disposal, because Ankit is more likely to get converted by Google. So it's good for you. I mean, of course, there is a long purchase journey, and we can
Yeah.
always look at the assist parameters and all that. But then again, there is a lot more discretion that it gives me as an advertiser. There is definitely more data control because the users can control, or the consumers can control to whom they want their data to be present it, and they can get paid for it. So instead of paying intermediaries, the payment can directly happen to the consumers for giving their data to the user or to the advertiser. So there's a lot more data control, a lot more transparency. Things like smart contracts can also come in. So again, I believe with fintech, which deals with a lot of data about user, not just what user gives, but also what we get from the data that the user gives. Blockchain will definitely play a very key role in doing more personalized and contextualized advertising. So if I have to point just one thing out, I would say
Blockchain
blockchain will
is the and
change dynamics in the next 5 to 10 years in fintech when it comes to digital.
Thanks, Ishan. Thanks for your prediction. So I think blockchain is it's an interesting one, and I'm hoping that it becomes in reality. Thanks for all the viewers who has joined us for this marketing Jedi with Ishan. Thank you again. Stay safe. Stay at home. Thank you again. Yeah.